The Trump administration intends to cancel all remaining federal contracts with Harvard University. Harvard President Alan Garber calls President Trump's actions perplexing and vows to stand firm in the university's actions. Joining us now, U.S. Education Secretary Linda McMahon. Madam Secretary, it's good to have you on this morning. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
You can convince me on some of this stuff, although I have a few problems. I think if I had to sum it up, you got to break a few eggs to make an omelet, but we're certainly breaking a few eggs. And what worries me is that I know Harvard is kind of an easy target probably in a lot of parts of the country. But there are some great things that come out of Harvard and have come out of Harvard. And I'm just wondering if that's taken into account with some of these actions that almost seem punitive and not really related to what the initial intention was for what to do with Harvard.
Well, certainly, Joe, Harvard is one of the preeminent universities in the world. And I think President Trump has a real knack for tapping into what a lot of people in the country, as you said, many parts of the country might look at and go, wait a second. They have a $53 billion endowment, and yet my tax dollars are going for about $9 billion right now. I understand a lot of that is for research, good research, by the way. And universities should continue to be able to do research as long as they're abiding by the laws and are in sync, I think, with the administration and what the administration is trying to accomplish, but primarily abiding by the laws. And when we looked at different aspects of what Harvard was doing relative to anti-Semitism on its campuses, they were not enforcing Title VI the way it should be. And we had conversations with President Garber, and I expected that we would have more, but Harvard's answer was a lawsuit, so that's where we find ourselves, right now. But it is, I think the president is looking at this as, okay, how can we really make our point? And what are the things that Harvard and other universities are doing that we have to call attention to? And when you look at these endowments, $53 billion at Harvard, that endowment doesn't sit still. It's invested. And if it can have a return of 5, 7, maybe sometimes 10% on that endowment, that's billions of dollars, that's maybe, as the president is looking to increase the endowment tax, that's something that the American public could wrap its head around. So I think that there are a lot of issues, that we can look at, and we'd like to continue to talk to Harvard.
I know that everything's a negotiation, I think, with President Trump, and I think he stakes out some positions that maybe, that he would soften if he saw some movement on the other side. But do you believe that every foreign student that comes, that the government needs to look at, their social media accounts to see if they're suitable? That's the kind of stuff that it looks like. I know companies can do that. They can hire whomever they want. They can look at social media history, et cetera. But is that really what we want the government involved with in whether a foreign student is able to attend an American university?
I don't know what the criteria are that the State Department or the Secretary of Homeland Security are setting up in terms of vetting students. But I think the president certainly had great concerns that there are foreign students, not everyone, but there are foreign students who come to this country, I do believe, who help create this unrest. There are activists who come in. I think there are professors that are hired and brought in who are teaching ideology more than they are the subject matter that perhaps parents who are sending their students to these universities expect. And so I think you start taking a hard look across a broad area, and then you can start to see where it is you really do need to focus. So I don't know what the criteria that the State Department is looking at. I'll leave that up to them. But certainly having an understanding of what students are coming into our country, what professors are being hired, what their backgrounds or ideologies might be, I think is a fair assessment to bring them on campuses here to teach the students who are going to the universities here in our country.
Secretary, let me ask you a question about schools with large endowments. Are you generally and broadly of the view that any school with a large endowment should be taxed in a different way, and that money at schools that have had success that money should effectively, if it's government money, be transferred to trade programs? I wonder, because while I know that there is this sort of pushback against Ivy League schools for all sorts of reasons. You know, there are lots of other schools in this country, including like a Notre Dame, frankly, that has enormous money at that school. And I can't imagine that it would be politically palatable to start, you know, taxing some of those schools. Maybe it would be.
Well, I think that's one of the things that the president has talked about, and you know, in the reconciliation package is taking a look at, should we tax you know, the revenue on endowments at these at universities that have these substantial endowments. As I said, these endowments don't sit still; they're invested. They can often throw off big returns. And I think what the president has suggested is perhaps taxing these endowments at the top corporate tax rate of 21%. Right now, it's 1.4% on certain universities, you know, that have a certain population, and you are taxing the delta of over $500,000, you know, per pupil. So, you know, there are some criteria in there that needs to be looked at. But I think taking a look at all of these issues, it's billions of dollars that could come into the government if this endowment revenue is taxed. Boy, and how could we use those billions of dollars? Could they provide other scholarships? Could they provide money in other forms? And I think the general public will look at that and say that might be a reasonable approach to take a look at. And you know, I think if I could just continue to make this point,
sure.
I do believe that generally we are taking a look at how education should be different. There is not the demand as much for four-year universities in terms of, no, if we're looking at doctors or lawyers or engineers or those kind of things, yes. But more and more parents and more students, more adults who are looking to upskill are looking at different programs, two-year or short-term programs. And one of the things that we've talked about at the Department of Education suggesting are short-term Pell Grants, and we've seen that's a bipartisan effort that's coming out of Congress, because we believe there are other ways to train people to make a good living for their families in this country and maybe not go into the debt of four-year universities. So I think the paradigm looking at education is shifting.